I'm Samantha Mitchell, 34 years old, and I've spent 15 years building a military career my family knows nothing about. When my sister Natalie's wedding invitation arrived, I knew I'd face the usual dismissal from parents who never supported my choice to serve. What I didn't expect was her groom Jason standing at attention, saluting me in front of everyone, and saying those words that changed everything. Major General, ma'am. Before I tell you how my family finally learned who I really am, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about standing your ground when nobody believes in you. I grew up in a picture-perfect colonial house in suburban Boston with my parents Frank and Diana Mitchell. From the outside, we were the ideal American family. Dad, the successful accountant, Mom, the former beauty queen turned community volunteer, and two daughters destined for respectable, traditionally feminine careers. My sister Natalie was 4 years younger, but somehow always seemed to be the adult in our relationship. She excelled at everything our parents valued. She was polite, studious, and most importantly, compliant. Girls like us become teachers or nurses, my mother would say during our Sunday dinners, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. We nurture, we support, we build families. My father would nod along, occasionally adding, leave the dangerous jobs to the men who are built for them. Natalie embraced this vision wholeheartedly. She played with dolls, joined future teachers' clubs, and eventually earned her degree in elementary education, just as our parents had mapped out. I was the anomaly, the daughter who asked for toy soldiers instead of Barbies for Christmas. My fascination with military service began with my grandfather Harold, my father's father. He'd served in Vietnam, earning a Purple Heart and carrying shrapnel in his leg that set off airport metal detectors until the day he died. While my parents showcased Natalie's dance recital trophies, they kept my grandfather's military photos in storage boxes in the attic. Pop, tell me about the jungle again, I'd whisper during his visits, when we'd sneak away from family gatherings to sit on the back porch swing. Sammy, he'd say, using the nickname my parents hated. The military made me who I am. Taught me what matters. Someday you'll find what makes you that strong. He'd show me his medals when my parents weren't looking, explaining each one with quiet pride. In high school, I joined ROTC despite my parents' objections. My mother cried when I came home in uniform the first time. You look like a boy, she sobbed, while my father shook his head in disappointment. It's just a phase, he assured my mother loudly enough for me to hear from the staircase. She'll grow out of it and realize there are better ways to serve her community. Ways that won't ruin her chances of finding a husband. Natalie, 14 at the time, watched this exchange with wide eyes, caught between family loyalty and sister solidarity. That night, she slipped into my room and sat on my bed. I think your uniform looks cool, she whispered, before quickly adding, but maybe Mom's right about it being dangerous? Even then, Natalie was learning the family dance, show momentary support for Sam before pivoting back to the approved narrative. By senior year, I'd risen to cadet commander of my unit and set my sights on West Point. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Bennett, was thrilled. My parents were horrified. Absolutely not. My father thundered when I announced my application plans over dinner. We didn't raise you to throw your life away playing soldier. It's the United States Military Academy, I corrected him, my voice shaking despite my resolve. And I'd graduate as an officer, not just some. I don't care if you'd graduate as the Queen of England, my mother interrupted. No daughter of mine is joining the army. What about your future? What about children? What about finding someone to take care of you? I can take care of myself, I said quietly. The argument escalated until my father delivered his ultimatum. If you pursue this ridiculous fantasy, you'll do it without our financial support or blessing. I looked to Natalie, hoping for backup, but she studied her plate intently, unwilling to choose sides. Later that night, I called my grandfather, who was living in a retirement community in Florida. They say they won't help me, I told him, fighting back tears. There was a long pause before he answered. Then I will, Sammy. I've been saving for something important. Turns out this is it. True to his word, My grandfather helped me complete my application and covered my initial expenses. When my acceptance letter arrived, my parents refused to acknowledge it. The night before I left home, I found a small package on my bed, a compass that had belonged to my grandfather in Vietnam with a note, "To help you find your way when the path isn't clear." I left for West Point the next morning while my parents were at work, their choice, not mine. Only Natalie stood in the driveway to wave goodbye, her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "Make sure you write," she said, hugging me awkwardly. "I will," I promised. "Take care of Mom and Dad." It was the beginning of an unspoken arrangement. I would forge my own path, and Natalie would stay behind to keep the peace. Neither of us realized then how deeply this division would shape our relationship over the next 15 years. West Point nearly broke me that first year. The physical demands were brutal but manageable. It was the isolation that hurt most. While other cadets received care packages and proud letters from home, my mail slot remained empty except for the occasional postcard from my grandfather and short, dutiful notes from Natalie. My roommate Kelly noticed. "Your family military too?" she asked one night after watching me open another envelope with my grandfather's shaky handwriting. "Just my grandfather," I answered. "My parents think I'm wasting my life." Kelly nodded knowingly. My mom felt the same way. Nurse, teacher, or trophy wife, those were my only acceptable options. We became instant friends, and through Kelly, I found my first taste of chosen family. Our little group of cadets supported each other through pre-dawn runs, academic challenges, and homesickness. Slowly, I stopped checking my empty mailbox and focused on building something my parents couldn't diminish or take away. I graduated with honors, feeling a bittersweet pride when I saw my grandfather in the audience, using a cane but standing tall in his old dress uniform. My parents attended only after he insisted, sitting stiffly through the ceremony and leaving immediately after, missing the traditional hat toss that symbolized our transformation from cadets to officers. "They'll come around," my grandfather promised during our brief celebration lunch. Some people need time to adjust their vision of who you are. But they never did. My first deployment came 6 months later, to Afghanistan. The night before I left, I called home, hoping fear might soften their stance. "I'm shipping out tomorrow," I said, the pay phone cold against my ear. "Well, be careful," my mother replied, her voice distant. "Will you be back for Christmas?" Natalie's bringing her new boyfriend. No acknowledgement of danger. No expression of pride. Just logistical questions about holiday planning. I realized then that the distance between us was no longer merely physical. During that first tour, I discovered my aptitude for strategic operations. While some officers excelled in direct combat, I had a gift for seeing patterns, anticipating threats, and developing effective response plans. My commanding officers took notice, and I rose through the ranks faster than even I expected. After 3 years of minimal contact with my parents, I was promoted to captain. I called home with the news, hoping finally for some recognition. "That's nice, dear," my mother said distractedly. "Did you get the wedding invitation?" Natalie's college roommate is getting married in June. I hung up and made a decision that would shape the next decade of my life. I would stop seeking their approval. I would build my career and keep my achievements to myself. If they couldn't see my value, I wouldn't beg them to look harder. My second deployment brought me under the command of Colonel Patricia Harris, a 30-year veteran who became the mother figure I desperately needed. She saw my potential and pushed me to reach it, mentoring me through increasingly complex assignments. "Mitchell," she said after I successfully coordinated a high-risk extraction that saved 32 civilians, "you've got the strategic mind of a general. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Coming from Colonel Harris, this wasn't empty praise. She nominated me for advanced leadership training and recommended me for early promotion consideration. Under her guidance, I developed the confidence I never found at home. Meanwhile, my visits to Boston grew increasingly tense and infrequent. Each homecoming followed the same painful script. My mother commenting on my appearance, "Military food must be terrible, you've gained weight." My father dismissing my career, still playing army, I see, and Natalie trying unsuccessfully to bridge the growing chasm between us. They ask about you, she'd insist during our rare private conversations. They just don't understand this life you've chosen. They don't try to understand, I'd counter, to which she never had a response. In their minds, I was still playing dress-up in a uniform, while Natalie was building a real life as an elementary school teacher in the same district where we'd grown up. When she bought a condo 15 minutes from our parents' house, they threw her a lavish housewarming party. When I was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor after our convoy was ambushed, I didn't even tell them. By my 10th year of service, I had built a life completely separate from my family. My military colleagues became my support system, people who understood sacrifice and duty without explanation. We celebrated promotions together, mourned fallen comrades, and held each other up through the hardest days. When my grandfather passed away during my 3rd deployment, I received emergency leave to attend his funeral. It was the first time I'd seen my parents in nearly 2 years. "He was so proud of you," my mother said at the reception, a rare acknowledgement that landed like a physical blow. Though I never understood why he encouraged this lifestyle. "Service isn't a lifestyle, Mom," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's a calling." My father overheard and scoffed. "A calling to what? To throw away your education? To put yourself in danger? To avoid real responsibility?" I looked at him, this man who had never served a day in his life, criticizing choices he couldn't comprehend. "My responsibility is to my country and my soldiers," I said quietly, "and I take it very seriously." He shook his head and walked away, ending the conversation as he always did when challenged. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I found a small wooden box among my grandfather's possessions that had been left to me. Inside were all the letters I'd written him over the years, alongside newspaper clippings about military operations I'd been part of. He'd been tracking my career all along, finding pride in the achievements my parents dismissed. By the time I reached the rank of lieutenant colonel at age 32, I had completely stopped sharing professional milestones with my family. When I called home, I deflected questions about my work with vague references to office duties and administrative tasks, allowing my parents to believe I held some insignificant desk job. It was easier than facing their dismissal. Colonel Harris, now General Harris, saw through my detachment. "Family wounds cut deepest," she told me during a late-night strategy session. "But remember, Mitchell, hiding your light doesn't actually protect you. It just keeps you in the dark." I nodded, but didn't change my approach. The distance felt safer than the constant battle for recognition I'd never receive. The invitation arrived while I was stationed at a forward operating base near the Syrian border, overseeing a joint intelligence operation. The cream-colored envelope stood out among the military correspondence and field reports on my desk. Natalie was getting married. Despite our complicated relationship, we'd maintained a steady, if superficial, connection over the years. Monthly phone calls, birthday cards, occasional visits when I was stateside. She'd mentioned a boyfriend named Jason several times, but I hadn't realized things had gotten serious. That night, my satellite phone rang, Natalie calling from 13 time zones away. "Did you get it?" she asked, her voice tinny through the poor connection. "Just opened it," I replied.
"Congratulations, naturvidenskabelig.
"I'm happy for you. Will you come? I know it's asking a lot with your job." She still hesitated when referring to my military service, conditioned by years of parental disapproval. "I'll request leave," I promised. "When's the last day I can confirm?" "That's actually why I'm calling," she said, her voice shifting to a higher pitch that signaled nervousness. "I was hoping you'd be my maid of honor." The request stunned me into silence. We'd grown so distant over the years, living in completely separate worlds. I'd assumed she'd choose one of her teacher friends or cousins for the role. "Are you sure?" I finally managed. "You're my sister, Sam," she said simply. No matter what. That no matter what contained years of unspoken tension, her silent witnessing of our parents' disapproval, her peaceful existence in the world I'd left behind, her quiet acceptance of the family narrative that painted my choices as misguided at best, shameful at worst. "I'd be honored," I said, pushing aside my reservations. "Send me the details about dresses and whatever else I need to know." After hanging up, I sat in my quarters, staring at the invitation. 3 weeks in Boston, surrounded by family members who either pitied or judged me. 3 weeks pretending my career was insignificant to avoid confrontation. 3 weeks watching my parents dote on Natalie while treating me like their disappointing afterthought. My executive officer knocked on my door, interrupting my thoughts. "Ma'am, the intelligence briefing is ready whenever you are." I tucked the invitation into my desk drawer. "I'll be right there, Captain." The contrast between my two lives had never felt so stark. Here, I commanded respect and authority. At home, I was perpetually 16 years old, fighting for basic recognition. 2 days later, during my weekly video session with Dr. Lauren Winters, the military psychologist I'd been seeing since a particularly difficult mission 8 months prior, I brought up the wedding. "I'm happy for Natalie," I said, but dreading everything else about it. Dr. Winters nodded, her gray eyes thoughtful behind rectangular glasses. "What specifically are you dreading?"
"The usual," he said.
Mom's comments about my weight and marital status. Dad's dismissive attitude about my pretend job. The exhaustion of hiding who I really am to keep the peace. "Why do you hide your rank and achievements?" she asked, though we discussed this many times before. "Because they don't deserve to know," I said automatically, then corrected myself. "No, that's not it. Because I'm tired of offering up parts of myself just to have them rejected or minimized." Have you considered that hiding your success might actually be reinforcing their misconception? That by downplaying your career, you're allowing their narrative to stand unchallenged. I'd never thought of it that way. So, what? I should show up in full dress uniform with all my medals? Dr. Winters smiled. That might be a bit dramatic for a wedding, but perhaps there's a middle ground between hiding and confrontation. We spent the rest of the session discussing boundaries and expectations. By the end, I decided to attend the wedding as simply Sam, no uniform, no title, but also no more pretending my career was trivial. If questions arose, I would answer honestly, but without seeking approval. "Remember," Dr. Winters said as our time ended, "you can't control their reaction, only your response to it." 6 weeks later, I was on a commercial flight to Boston, dressed in civilian clothes that felt foreign after months in uniform. I'd arranged for 3 weeks' leave, one before the wedding for preparations, the wedding week itself, and one after for family time, though I already regretted that last week. My mother met me at the airport, air-kissing my cheek to avoid smudging her lipstick. "You look healthy," she said, her standard euphemism for "you've gained weight." "The Army feeds us well," I replied lightly, refusing to take the bait. "I suppose they must," she said, eyeing my athletic build with thinly veiled disapproval. Natalie's just beside herself with excitement. "The caterers had a cancellation yesterday, but we sorted it all out. And wait until you see her dress, absolute perfection." The drive to my parents' house was filled with wedding details and community gossip, with no questions about my life or work. It was as if the past 15 years had simply been a blank space in our family history. My father was in his study when we arrived, emerging briefly to give me a perfunctory hug. "So the soldier returns," he said, his attempt at humor falling flat. "Surprised they could spare you from all that important work." "National security will somehow manage without me for 3 weeks," I replied, matching his sarcastic tone. He raised his eyebrows. "I'm sure it will. Your room's all set up. Your mother turned it into her sewing room, but she cleared some space for you." That night, Natalie came over for dinner, bringing her fiancé Jason for what would be our first meeting. He was tall with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Sam." Finally, Natalie embraced me with genuine warmth. "I was starting to think you lived permanently overseas." "Only semi-permanently," I joked, then turned to Jason. "Good to meet the man brave enough to join this family." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? But he simply smiled, Brave is a relative term. I think fortunate fits better. Throughout dinner, I noticed Jason studying me with curious glances while my parents performed their usual routine, showcasing Natalie's accomplishments while tactfully ignoring mine. Natalie just received the district's Teacher of the Year award, my mother announced, beaming. The superintendent said they've never had someone connect with children so naturally. That's amazing, Nat, I said sincerely. Congratulations. It's not exactly saving the world, Natalie demurred, but I love what I do. Not everyone needs to save the world, my father added pointedly. Some people are content making a difference right here at home. The implication was clear. My choice to serve globally somehow made my contribution less meaningful than Natalie's local impact. I took a large sip of wine instead of responding. Later, as Jason helped me clear the dishes, he asked quietly, "How long have you been in the service?" 15 years, I replied, surprised by his interest. How did you know? The way you carry yourself, he said. My dad was career military. You develop an eye for it. Before I could respond, my mother called from the dining room, "Jason, dear, tell Sam about your charity work. She's always been interested in, what do they call it, humanitarian causes." The conversation shifted, and I lost my chance to ask Jason more about his military connections. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of wedding talk and thinly veiled criticisms disguised as concern for my well-being. After Natalie and Jason left, I retreated to my childhood bedroom, now a sewing room with a twin bed crammed in the corner. Boxes of my old belongings lined one wall, never fully unpacked after being removed to make space for my mother's crafting supplies. I felt like a visitor in my own history. I called Captain Michael Donovan, my trusted second-in-command who was overseeing operations in my absence. "How's the family reunion, General?" he asked, the only person who would use my rank during these 3 weeks. "About as expected," I sighed. "I'm regretting that 3rd week already." "You could always claim a national emergency," he suggested, only half joking. "Don't tempt me." I laughed, then grew serious. "How's everything there?" "Under control. Focus on your sister's wedding. We've got this." After hanging up, I dug through one of the boxes until I found what I was looking for, my grandfather's compass, the one he'd given me before West Point. I held it in my palm, remembering his words, "To help you find your way when the path isn't clear." The path had never felt less clear than now, caught between the person my family thought I was and the leader I'd become. The rehearsal dinner the following night was an exercise in restraint. Held at an upscale restaurant in downtown Boston, it brought together both families for the first time. While Natalie made introductions, I stood awkwardly near the bar, nursing a glass of wine and observing the social dynamics. My mother fluttered between guests, playing the role of wedding coordinator and proud maternal figure. "This is our daughter Samantha," she would say when forced to acknowledge my presence. "She works for the government." No further explanation, no hint of pride, just a quick pivot back to Natalie and her accomplishments. Jason's parents, Thomas and Barbara Cooper, seemed pleasant if somewhat reserved. His father, a tall man with military-straight posture, caught my eye several times during dinner, his expression curious. During the salad course, he finally addressed me directly. "Natalie mentioned you're in the Army," he said. "Where are you stationed currently?" Before I could answer, my father interjected from across the table. "Sam's been bouncing around for years. Some kind of administrative position, isn't it, Sam?" I felt heat rise to my face. "I work in strategic operations and intelligence," I said carefully. "Oh, like a secretary for the important people?" my mother added helpfully, causing several guests to chuckle. Jason's father frowned slightly, but didn't pursue the topic. Later, as guests mingled over dessert, he approached me again. "Thomas Cooper," he said, extending his hand. "Former Marine Corps, retired as colonel after 30 years. Suddenly Jason's earlier recognition made sense. "Samantha Mitchell," I replied, instinctively straightening my posture. "I thought so," he said quietly. "My son mentioned meeting his fiancée's sister at some charity event last year. Said she was impressive, but didn't elaborate." Now I understand why. I blinked in surprise. I've never met Jason before last night. Thomas smiled knowingly. Not as Natalie's boyfriend, perhaps. But he runs a veteran support foundation, does a lot of work with active service members. Before I could process this information, Natalie appeared at my elbow. I see you've met Jason's dad. Isn't he great? He has all these amazing military stories, just like you probably do. I was just telling your sister that Jason speaks highly of her, Thomas said smoothly. Natalie beamed. Everyone loves Sam once they get to know her. Mom and Dad just wish she'd find a nice job closer to home, right, Sam? I forced a smile. Something like that. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I joined Natalie and her bridesmaids at the hotel suite for hair and makeup, steeling myself for hours of girl talk and passive-aggressive comments. Sam, darling, I've told the stylist to give you something that minimizes your jawline, my mother announced as I entered the suite. And I've brought some concealer for those circles under your eyes. All that army stress doesn't do your complexion any favors. Natalie shot me an apologetic look as I submitted to the ministrations of a makeup artist who seemed determined to transform me into someone unrecognizable. Maybe something subtle, I suggested as she reached for false eyelashes. I'm not really comfortable with. Nonsense, my mother interrupted. This is Natalie's day, and the photos will last forever. We want everyone looking their best. The underlying message was clear. My natural appearance wasn't good enough for her perfect wedding vision. I caught Natalie's eye in the mirror, silently asking if this really mattered to her. She gave a tiny shrug that I interpreted as please just go along with it. So I did, allowing myself to be painted and primped into my mother's version of femininity. While the bridesmaids chatted about their relationships and careers, I sat quietly, feeling increasingly out of place. These women had known Natalie for years through teaching, while I'd become little more than a holiday visitor in my sister's life. So, Sam, any special man in your life? Asked Bridget, a petite brunette who taught third grade with Natalie. Not currently, I replied, bracing for the inevitable follow-up. That's such a shame, cooed another bridesmaid. Is it hard to date in the military? All those regulations and moving around. Before I could answer, my mother interjected. Sam's always been career-focused. Hasn't had time for building a real life, have you, dear? I bit back a retort about what constituted a real life, and simply smiled tightly. My work keeps me busy. Well, there will be plenty of eligible men at the reception, my mother continued. Jason has some very handsome friends. Maybe you'll finally meet someone who can convince you to settle down. The stylist working on my hair tugged a bit too hard, as if punctuating my mother's statement. I winced but remained silent, counting the hours until this performance would be over. As the bridesmaids dispersed to get dressed, Natalie pulled me aside. I'm sorry about Mom, she whispered. You know how she gets. It's fine, I said automatically. This is your day, not mine. Natalie hesitated, then said, Jason told me he recognized you when you met. From some military event. I froze. What did he say exactly? Just that he'd seen you at a Medal of Honor ceremony last year. He runs this foundation for veterans, and apparently you were there representing your unit or something. She looked uncertain. He seemed impressed, which is weird because Mom and Dad always make it sound like you just push papers around. It's complicated, I said carefully. What else did he say? Nothing specific. Just that I should be proud of you. She tilted her head curiously. Should I be? Proud of you, I mean? Is there something you haven't told us about your work? The moment hung between us, an opportunity for honesty after years of strategic omission. But looking at Natalie in her bridal robe, surrounded by wedding paraphernalia, I couldn't bring myself to shift the focus. I just do my job, I said finally. Today is about you, not my career. She seemed disappointed but nodded. Well, whatever you do, Jason thinks it's important. And for what it's worth, so do I. Before I could respond, my mother bustled in announcing it was time for photos, and the moment passed. I changed into my bridesmaid dress, a flattering but uncomfortable silk gown in dusty rose, and joined the others for the pre-ceremony photo session. As we posed on the hotel's garden terrace, I spotted Jason and his groomsmen arriving. He caught my eye and gave a subtle nod of recognition that seemed loaded with meaning. I suddenly felt exposed, wondering exactly what he knew about me and why he hadn't said anything directly. During a brief break in the photos, I managed to pull him aside. "Natalie mentioned you recognized me from a ceremony last year." Jason looked around to ensure we weren't overheard. "It was the Central Command Distinction Awards. You received commendation for the Haditha operation." I stared at him, shocked that he knew about a classified mission that had saved dozens of lives but never made public news. "That information isn't. My foundation works closely with high-level military personnel," he explained quickly. "I've heard your name mentioned in certain circles, with a lot of respect. Does Natalie know about my rank, my position?" He shook his head. "I gathered from meeting your parents that you keep things compartmentalized." I didn't feel it was my place to say anything. Relief washed over me. "I'd appreciate if you'd continue not to. Today should be about you and Natalie, not my complicated relationship with my family." Jason studied me for a moment. "Can I ask why? Why hide who you are from them?" "Because they decided who I was 15 years ago," I said simply. "And nothing I've achieved since has changed their minds." He nodded slowly. "I understand. Your secret is safe with me, General." Hearing my rank spoken aloud in this setting sent a jolt through me. "Thank you," I said quietly, just as my mother called for the next round of photos. Throughout the afternoon, I caught snippets of my parents' conversations with relatives and friends, each one a small cut to my professional dignity. "Samantha? Oh, she does something administrative for the Army. Not a combat role, thank goodness. We always hoped she'd find a more suitable career, but you know how stubborn she can be." "No husband yet. Her lifestyle makes it difficult to meet someone appropriate. We're still hoping she'll come to her senses and move back home. The Army was just a rebellion phase that unfortunately stuck. But Natalie has always been our practical one. Teaching is such a perfect career for a young woman, don't you think?" Each comment reinforced what I'd always known. In their eyes, I would never measure up to the daughter they wanted me to be. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself retreating both physically and emotionally, seeking quiet corners where I could escape the constant reminders of my outsider status. An hour before the ceremony, I slipped into the empty church sanctuary, needing a moment alone. I sat in a back pew, surrounded by flowers and ribbons, and considered what it would mean to simply leave, to make an excuse about a work emergency and fly back to my unit where I belonged, where I was valued. The thought was tempting, but as I stood to go, I caught sight of a photo of Natalie that had been placed near the guest book. My little sister, beaming with genuine happiness. Whatever complications existed between us, she had asked me to stand beside her on this day. I couldn't disappoint her, even if it meant enduring a few more hours of parental disapproval. With renewed resolve, I straightened my shoulders, a soldier preparing for a difficult mission, and returned to the bridal suite where Natalie was being helped into her wedding gown. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Natalie looked radiant walking down the aisle on our father's arm, and Jason's face, when he saw her, contained everything a bride could hope for: love, awe, certainty. Standing at the altar as maid of honor, I found myself genuinely moved by their exchange of vows, particularly Jason's promise to honor your past, support your present, and help build your future. For a brief, magical hour, family tensions dissolved into the universal emotion of witnessing two people commit their lives to each other. Even my parents seemed softer, more genuine, as they watched their younger daughter take this traditional step they'd always valued. After the ceremony, the bridal party was whisked away for more photos while guests proceeded to the reception venue, an elegant converted boathouse overlooking the Charles River. By the time we arrived, cocktail hour was in full swing, and I steeled myself for the social gauntlet ahead. "There she is, our other daughter," my father called as I entered, his arm around a business associate. The forced joviality in his voice set my teeth on edge. Sam, come meet Roger. We were just talking about Natalie's teaching award. I obediently joined them, shaking Roger's hand and smiling politely as my father continued. Roger's son just made partner at Sullivan and Williams, youngest in the firm's history. Congratulations to him, I said, recognizing the familiar pattern, my father highlighting someone else's child's conventional success as a pointed contrast to my choices. What is it you do again, Samantha? Roger asked. She's in the army, my father answered before I could speak. Some sort of office work, right, Sam? I took a deep breath, remembering my conversation with Dr. Winters. I work in strategic operations and intelligence, I said clearly. Currently overseeing joint military initiatives in the Middle East. My father's smile faltered slightly before he recovered. Well, someone has to handle the paperwork, I suppose. Roger, have you tried the crab cakes? Absolutely outstanding. And just like that, the moment of potential recognition was diverted. Throughout dinner, I watched my parents bask in the glow of hosting a perfect wedding, accepting compliments on everything from the flower arrangements to Natalie's choice of husband. Both our girls were always so different. I overheard my mother telling a table of her friends. Natalie knew exactly what she wanted: stability, family, community. Samantha was always searching for something. We still hope she'll find whatever it is and come back home. The first dance brought a lump to my throat as Jason led Natalie across the floor to At Last, her favorite song since childhood. They moved well together, clearly having practiced, and the love between them was palpable even from across the room. Next came the father-daughter dance, my father beaming with pride as he waltzed with Natalie. Then the mother-son dance, with Jason and his mother sharing a sweet moment to Frank Sinatra. As the formal dances concluded, the band invited all guests to join in. I was heading toward the bar when my mother intercepted me, a tall man in tow. Samantha, have you met Dr. Alan Peterson? He's just opened a pediatric practice in Cambridge. Alan, this is my daughter Sam. The setup couldn't have been more transparent, but Dr. Peterson seemed nice enough, if slightly uncomfortable with my mother's obvious matchmaking. Nice to meet you, I said, extending my hand. Are you a friend of Jason's? College roommate, he confirmed, though we've stayed close. Your mother mentioned you're in town just for the wedding. Yes, I live overseas most of the year. My mother jumped in. Sam's job keeps her moving around, but we're hoping she'll find something more permanent soon. 34 is such a crucial time for a woman. That biological clock won't wait forever, will it, Sam?
Dr.
Peterson's eyes widened slightly at her bluntness, and I felt heat rise to my face. If you'll excuse me, I said tightly, I need to check on something with the bridesmaids. I escaped to the ladies' room, leaning against the cool marble counter and breathing deeply. Just a few more hours, I told myself. You've endured worse than this. When I returned to the reception, the dancing was in full swing, but I noticed a cluster of relatives at a table near the back, my father holding court at the center. As I approached, I caught fragments of their conversation. Never understood the appeal, personally. Samantha could have done anything. She had the grades for law school, even medical school. But she got this military bug from my father and wouldn't let it go. Does she see combat? Asked an elderly aunt, looking concerned. My father laughed. God, no. She's in some office pushing papers. Though she likes to make it sound more exciting than it is. You know how these administrative types are, always trying to seem more important than they really are. I froze, hidden partially by a floral arrangement, as my mother joined in. Frank, be fair. I'm sure what Samantha does is necessary in its own way. But yes, it's all rather vague desk work from what we can gather. Not exactly saving lives. The irony of her statement hit me like a physical blow. Just 4 months earlier, I had coordinated an extraction operation that rescued 18 hostages from a terrorist cell, an operation I couldn't discuss because of its classified nature, but one that had literally saved lives. I was about to walk away when my father's voice stopped me. The real shame is that she's thrown away her chance at a normal life. No husband, no children, no real home. Just this endless playing soldier, while her youth slips away. Natalie, thank goodness, had more sense. Maybe she enjoys her work, Frank, said an uncle I'd always liked. Not everyone wants the same things in life. Enjoyment doesn't build a legacy, my father replied dismissively. What will Samantha have to show for her life when all this army business is done? Natalie will have a family, a community that knows her name. Sam will just have whatever medals they give out for typing reports correctly. The group laughed, and I felt something inside me crack. 15 years of dismissal, minimization, and outright mockery crystallized in that moment. I turned away, nearly colliding with the server carrying champagne. Across the room, I spotted Jason watching me, his expression suggesting he'd overheard at least part of the conversation. He gave me a small nod that somehow contained both apology and solidarity before being pulled back into conversation with his groomsmen. I made my way to the bar, ordered a whiskey neat, and retreated to a quiet corner to collect myself. I had almost regained my composure when my parents approached with an elderly couple I recognized as my mother's cousins from Philadelphia. There you are, Sam, my mother said brightly. Judith and Howard were just asking about you. We hear you're quite the career woman, Judith said kindly. Something in the military? Yes, I began, but my father interrupted. Sam couldn't find a husband, so she joined the army, he said with a laugh that was clearly meant to be jovial but landed as cruel. Been playing soldier ever since, haven't you, kiddo? The whiskey in my stomach turned to acid. 15 years of service, multiple combat deployments, medals earned through blood and courage, lives saved through strategy and leadership, all reduced to playing soldier because I couldn't find a husband. I opened my mouth to finally, after all these years, set the record straight, to tell them exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished, when I noticed Jason approaching our small group, his expression unreadable. I'm telling you, my father continued, unaware of Jason's approach, it's like she's been playing dress-up all these years. Army Barbie. He chuckled at his own joke while my mother smiled indulgently. Frank, she chided without conviction, be nice. I'm sure Samantha does something useful in her office job. It was at that precise moment that Jason reached our circle. Without hesitation, he snapped to attention, executed a perfect military salute, and said in a clear, carrying voice, Major General, ma'am. The honorific hung in the air like a thunderclap. Conversations nearby faltered as heads turned toward our small group. My father's laughter died abruptly, replaced by confusion. I'm sorry, what did you call her? He asked, looking between Jason and me. Jason maintained perfect military bearing as he replied, Major General Samantha Mitchell, sir. Two-star general, currently the youngest in the United States Army and one of only a handful of women to achieve that rank. Silence spread outward from our position like ripples in a pond. My mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. My father's face cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and the beginning stages of shock. There must be some mistake, my mother finally managed. Samantha's just she works in an office, she's not. With respect, Mrs. Mitchell, Jason continued formally, your daughter commands over 20,000 troops and oversees strategic operations across 3 countries. Her last mission saved 18 American hostages and 34 civilian lives. The elderly couple who had been subjected to my father's jokes looked at me with new eyes, respect, awe, and no small amount of confusion evident in their expressions. Is this true? My father demanded, turning to me. For the first time in my adult life, I saw him genuinely wrong-footed, his certainty about who I was and what I did shattered in a single moment. Before I could answer, another voice joined the conversation. It's absolutely true. Thomas Cooper, Jason's father and former Marine colonel, stepped forward. Your daughter's reputation in military circles is exceptional. The Mitchell extraction, as it's now known, will be taught at West Point for generations. The bubble of silence around us had expanded to encompass nearly half the reception. From the corner of my eye, I could see Natalie making her way toward us, concern etched on her face. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, her voice small and uncertain. 15 years of dismissed achievements, minimized sacrifices, and outright mockery crystallized in that moment. I straightened to my full height, unconsciously adopting the posture that commanded respect from generals and heads of state. I tried, Mom. For years, I tried. But you and Dad had already decided that my choice to serve was a mistake, a phase, a failure to achieve what you wanted for me. Every promotion, every commendation, every step forward in my career was met with the same dismissal, that I was wasting my potential, avoiding real responsibility, playing dress-up. My father's face had drained of color. But a general? That's not possible. You're only 34. Youngest female general in Army history, confirmed a man I didn't recognize, who stepped forward from a nearby table. Sir, I served under your daughter in Baghdad. She saved our entire unit through a strategic decision that should have been impossible. It's an honor to see her again. He nodded respectfully in my direction. I realized then that there were several military or former military personnel at the wedding, friends of Jason's through his foundation work, most likely, who had recognized me but respectfully maintained my privacy. Natalie had reached our group by now, her eyes wide with confusion. Sam? What's happening? Jason turned to his new wife. I'm sorry for the disruption, but I couldn't stand by and listen to your parents mischaracterize your sister's service any longer.
He looked at me.
I apologize if I overstepped, General. The formal address in this setting felt surreal, worlds colliding in a way I'd never anticipated. At ease, I said automatically, then immediately felt ridiculous using military commands at my sister's wedding reception. Will someone please explain what's going on? Natalie asked, looking between her new husband and me. I took a deep breath. Nat, I've never been completely honest with you about my military career. I'm not just some administrative officer. I'm a major general, commanding strategic operations across the Middle East and parts of North Africa. Her eyes widened impossibly further. A general? Like, with stars and everything. Despite the tension, I couldn't help but smile at her simplified understanding. Yes, with stars. 2 of them, currently. But why wouldn't you tell us? She looked hurt rather than impressed, which somehow cut deeper than my parents' shock. Because every time I tried to talk about my career, our parents made it clear they thought I was wasting my life. After a while, it was easier to let them believe what they wanted than to fight for recognition they weren't willing to give. My father had recovered enough to attempt damage control, aware of the growing audience. Well, this is quite a surprise. Of course, we're very proud of Samantha. We just had no idea the extent of her responsibilities. The transparent insincerity of his sudden pride made something snap inside me. 15 years of diminishment could not be erased with one convenient moment of recognition. No, Dad, you're not proud. You're embarrassed, not of me, but of how wrong you've been. For 15 years, you've told everyone who would listen that I was throwing my life away playing soldier. You've belittled my choices, dismissed my career, and treated my service as a personal affront to your vision of what a daughter should be. The reception had gone completely silent now, hundreds of eyes watching our family drama unfold. In any other circumstance, I would have been mortified, but years of commanding troops in life-or-death situations had burned away my fear of public speaking. I've led men and women into combat. I've made decisions that determined whether people lived or died. I've been shot at, bombed, and ambushed. I've received the Bronze Star, the Legion of Merit, and a dozen other commendations I never told you about because you made it clear my service didn't matter to you. My mother had begun to cry, mascara tracking down her carefully made-up face. We were just worried about you, she whispered. No, you were disappointed in me, I corrected gently. There's a difference. You wanted me to be a copy of Natalie, and Nat, I love you, and I'm incredibly proud of you, but that wasn't my path. I found purpose in service, in leadership, in protecting others. And instead of trying to understand that, you chose to diminish it because it didn't fit your narrow definition of success. Natalie stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, I thought you were just... I don't even know what I thought. I didn't want to put you in the middle, I said honestly. You were always trying to keep the peace, and I didn't want to force you to choose sides. There shouldn't have been sides, she said, her voice breaking. We're family. The raw emotion in her voice hit me harder than any of my parents' reactions. While I'd been protecting Natalie from conflict, I'd also been denying her the chance to truly know me. You're right, I acknowledged. I should have trusted you with the truth, regardless of how Mom and Dad might have reacted. An uncomfortable silence descended until Jason's father stepped forward again. If I might say something, he began, addressing my parents directly. As a military parent myself, I understand the fear. But I learned long ago that our children's paths are their own to choose. Your daughter has served this country with exceptional distinction. That's not something to tolerate or dismiss. It's something to celebrate. Several guests murmured agreement, and I noticed a few of the older men in the crowd, likely veterans themselves, nodding solemnly. My father looked around, suddenly aware that he was on the wrong side of the room's sentiment. He straightened his shoulders and did something I'd never seen him do. He extended his hand to me, not as his daughter, but as an equal. It seems I owe you an apology, Samantha. Or should I say, General Mitchell? The gesture was small, perhaps even calculated given our audience, but it was also the first acknowledgement of my professional identity he'd ever offered. I hesitated for just a moment before accepting his handshake. Sam is fine, Dad. He nodded, an unreadable emotion crossing his face. Perhaps we could talk more about your work after the reception. I'd like to understand better what you do. It wasn't a full reconciliation. Too much hurt existed for that, but it was an opening, a crack in the wall of dismissal I'd faced for 15 years. My mother wiped her tears, visibly trying to regain her composure. Yes, of course. We'd love to hear about everything. She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I always did think you looked smart in uniform. The blatant revision of history might have angered me in the past, but now it just felt sad. A desperate attempt to rewrite a narrative that had already played out in front of witnesses. I think, Natalie said firmly, taking control of the situation, that it's time for the cake cutting. Sam, would you and Jason's best man lead everyone to the dessert area? She was offering me an escape from the spotlight, and I took it gratefully. As the crowd began to disperse, following the direction of the wedding planner who had appeared to help transition the event, I felt a light touch on my arm. It was Jason. I'm sorry if I created a scene, he said quietly. But I couldn't stand by and listen to them diminish what you've done, who you are. Thank you, I said simply. Not many men would risk disrupting their own wedding reception for their new sister-in-law's dignity. He smiled. Let's just say I have a particular respect for the chain of command. As we moved toward the cake display, I caught Natalie looking at me with new eyes, not just as her somewhat distant older sister, but as someone she perhaps didn't fully know. The revelation seemed to intrigue rather than disappoint her, and I felt a glimmer of hope that this might be the beginning of a more authentic relationship between us. The rest of the reception proceeded with a strange new energy. Guests who had previously given me polite but disinterested greetings now approached with questions and congratulations. Several of Jason's friends with military connections shared stories of operations I'd overseen, though they were careful to avoid classified details. My parents moved through the crowd with fixed smiles, accepting congratulations for their daughter's achievements as though they'd been supportive all along. I watched their performance with a mixture of amusement and lingering hurt, wondering if anything would truly change after tonight. As the evening wound down, Natalie found me near the exit. So, she said, a hint of wonder still in her voice, my big sister is kind of a big deal. I laughed. I just do my job, Nat. A job that involves 2 stars and saving lives. She shook her head. All these years, I don't know what I thought. That you were just avoiding settling down, I guess. That's what Mom and Dad always implied. I have settled down, I said gently. Just not in the way they expected. My career, my soldiers, that's my life. And it's a good one. She nodded slowly. I think I'd like to hear more about it. The real version, not the watered-down one you've been telling us. I'd like that too, I said, feeling a weight lifting that I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. And I want to hear more about your life too, the real version, not just the holiday update calls. She hugged me then, careful not to wrinkle her wedding dress.
Deal.
But first, I have a honeymoon to go on. As she pulled away, she studied my face. You know, I always thought you were running away from something. But you weren't, were you? You were running toward something. The best things in life usually aren't where people tell you to look, I replied. They're where you feel called to go. She smiled, wisdom beyond her years in her eyes. I think that might be the best wedding gift anyone's given me today. The morning after the wedding, I sat in my hotel room staring at the dress uniform I'd brought but never intended to wear. After last night's revelations, hiding felt pointless, but I wasn't yet ready to don the physical representation of the career my parents had dismissed for so long. I was scheduled to have breakfast with Natalie and Jason before they left for their honeymoon, a tentative first step toward a more honest relationship with my sister. My plan was to check out afterward and spend my remaining leave time touring New England rather than enduring the awkward aftermath with my parents. A knock at my door interrupted these thoughts. When I opened it, I found both my parents standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable but determined. "May we come in?" my father asked, his usual authoritative tone replaced by something approaching humility. Surprised, I stepped aside. Of course. They entered hesitantly, as if unsure of their welcome in my space. My mother looked around the hotel room, perhaps searching for visible signs of the military career she'd just discovered. "We thought you'd be staying with us for the rest of your visit," she said, a question embedded in the statement. "I'm checking out after breakfast with Natalie and Jason," I replied, not unkindly, but firmly. "I think we all need some space to process last night." My father nodded, then seemed to gather his courage. "Samantha, your mother, and I have been talking all night. We owe you an apology, many apologies, in fact." The words were so unexpected that I could only stare at him. In 34 years, I had never heard my father apologize for anything substantial. "We've been wrong," he continued, his voice roughening with emotion. "For 15 years, we've been so focused on what we wanted for you that we couldn't see what you were actually accomplishing. It wasn't just that we were worried," my mother added, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "Though we were terribly worried. But we also couldn't understand why our smart, beautiful daughter would choose such a difficult path when there were so many easier options." "Easier isn't always better, Mom," I said quietly. "We know that now," she replied, tears forming in her eyes. "Or we're trying to know it. When Jason said your rank last night, when those people came forward to talk about how you'd saved lives, it was like finally seeing a person who'd been standing in front of us all along." My father cleared his throat. "I was raised to believe there were certain paths for women and others for men. Your grandfather challenged that thinking, but I resisted. It was easier to dismiss your choices than to reconsider my beliefs." The admission cost him visibly. His face flushed, his hands clenched at his sides. "After the reception, we spoke with Thomas, Jason's father," he continued. "He helped us understand what your rank means, what kind of responsibility you carry. And he didn't mince words about how poorly we've supported you. It made us realize," my mother said softly, "that we've missed so much of your life."
Realment important moments.
Because we were too stubborn to listen, to learn. The apology was imperfect, still laden with their perspective rather than genuine understanding of mine, but it was more than I'd ever expected to receive. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But this isn't something we can fix in one conversation. There's been too much dismissal for too long." "We know," my father acknowledged. "We're not asking for immediate forgiveness. Just a chance to start over. To get to know the daughter we have instead of holding on to the one we thought we wanted." The vulnerability in his voice, this man who had always presented himself as unquestionably right about everything, moved me more than I wanted to admit. "I can't promise anything," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to try if you are." My mother stepped forward hesitantly. "Could we start by having breakfast together? All of us, you, me, your father, Natalie, and Jason?" One meal as a family before they leave. The request was small but meaningful, a first tentative step toward whatever our relationship might become. I nodded slowly. I'll call Natalie and ask if they'd mind. They left shortly after, allowing me space to prepare for the day. As I dressed in civilian clothes, I felt oddly lighter. Not healed. The wounds were too deep for that, but perhaps on the path toward something new. Breakfast was awkward, but not hostile. My parents made visible efforts to ask questions about my work, though they still struggled with military terminology and concepts. Natalie watched the exchange with cautious optimism, while Jason occasionally filled gaps in the conversation with insights from his foundation work. "So you actually give orders to how many people?" my father asked, genuinely trying to comprehend the scope of my command. "About 22,000 currently," I replied. "Though the direct chain of command is more complex than that." He shook his head in wonder. "I manage a team of 12 accountants and find that challenging enough." It was the first time he'd ever compared our professional experiences without diminishing mine, and I felt a small crack in the wall between us. As Natalie and Jason prepared to leave for their honeymoon, my sister pulled me aside. "They came to see you, didn't they? Mom and Dad?" I nodded. It was unexpected. "They were up all night talking," she confided. "I've never seen them so shaken. Dad actually said the words I was wrong. I thought I was hallucinating." I laughed despite myself. Miracles do happen. Her expression grew serious. "Are you going to give them a chance?" "I'm trying," I said honestly. "But it's complicated. Families usually are." She squeezed my hand. "For what it's worth, I'm incredibly proud to be your sister. Both the woman I've always known and the general I just met." Her words touched something deep inside me, the lingering desire for family recognition that I'd tried to bury under layers of professional accomplishment and independence. "That means more than you know," I told her, embracing her tightly. After Natalie and Jason departed, I surprised myself by accepting my parents' invitation to dinner. Over the next few days, we established a fragile new dynamic, them asking questions they should have asked years ago, me offering limited but honest answers about my life and career. "Your grandfather would have been so proud," my father said during one of these conversations, his voice thick with emotion. "He always said you had the making of a leader." "He knew," I revealed quietly. "About my promotions, my commendations. I wrote to him about everything." Pain flashed across my father's face. "He never told me." "I asked him not to," I admitted. I couldn't bear to have those achievements dismissed along with everything else. The truth hurt him visibly, but he nodded in understanding. "I gave you no reason to trust me with your successes." By the end of that week, I had decided to stay the full 3 weeks of my leave after all. The relationship with my parents remained fragile, filled with awkward moments and occasional retreats to old patterns, but something fundamental had shifted. 6 months later, I stood on a stage at Fort Bragg, receiving formal recognition for the operation that had rescued those 18 hostages. As I concluded my brief remarks and stepped back from the podium, I caught sight of familiar faces in the audience, my parents, dressed in their Sunday best, watching with expressions I'd never seen directed at me before. Unmistakable pride. They had flown across the country for the ceremony after I'd sent a cautious invitation, unsure if they would accept or even want to attend. Not only had they come, but they'd spent the previous day touring the base, asking questions about my daily life, and meeting colleagues who clearly respected me. At the reception afterward, I introduced them to General Patricia Harris, the mentor who had guided my career when they would not. "Your daughter is one of the finest officers I've ever worked with," she told them directly. "Her tactical mind is exceptional, but it's her leadership, her ability to inspire loyalty and courage in others, that truly sets her apart." My mother, who once couldn't discuss my career without changing the subject, asked thoughtful questions about what qualities made an effective military leader. My father, who had dismissed my service as playing soldier, engaged in a detailed conversation about strategic planning with one of my staff officers. That evening, over dinner at an upscale restaurant near the base, my father raised his glass in a toast. To Major General Samantha Mitchell, he said, using my rank and title without a trace of irony or discomfort. Who knew exactly who she was meant to be, even when we couldn't see it? My mother added softly, and who had the courage to forge her own path, despite our lack of support. I blinked back unexpected tears as we clinked glasses. The journey from rejection to recognition had been long and painful, but in that moment, I felt the possibility of a relationship I'd long ago given up hope for, one based on who I actually was, not who they had wanted me to be. 2 months after that, my parents hosted a dinner party for their neighbors and closest friends. I attended while on leave, expecting the usual awkward navigation of my place in the family narrative. Instead, I overheard my father introducing me to his golf partner. "This is our daughter, Major General Samantha Mitchell," he said, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "She commands strategic operations across 3 countries and recently received special commendation from the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The casual accuracy of his description, no minimizing, no qualifications, was perhaps the greatest evidence of how far we had come. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, my mother embraced me with uncharacteristic emotion. "I wish we hadn't wasted so many years," she whispered. "I'm sorry it took us so long to see you." "We got here eventually," I replied, surprising myself with the forgiveness in my voice. That's what matters now. The path to healing our family wounds remains ongoing, too many years of dismissal and hurt to be erased by a few months of effort. But that night at Natalie's wedding, when Jason's simple act of recognition forced my parents to truly see me for the first time, became the catalyst for change I'd stopped believing was possible. I've learned that sometimes the hardest battle isn't fought on foreign soil, but across the dinner table of your childhood home. That recognition from strangers can feel hollow when those who should know you best refuse to see your truth. And that even the deepest family wounds can begin to heal if we find the courage to stand in our authentic selves and the grace to allow others the space to grow. Have you ever had a moment when someone finally saw the real you after years of being misunderstood? Or have you been the one who needed to reconsider your perception of someone close to you? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to bridge the gap between who others think you are and who you've truly become. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember that your worth isn't determined by others' recognition, but by the impact you create and the integrity with which you live.